Okay, Rosebuds, we are back. We've been talking with Derek Van Gorder. He's a cameraman, YouTuber, and philosopher. So far, we've gone through his top two political priorities in radical kindness as well as a basic income. We're now on to his final topic, which is political polarization. Derek, why is political polarization so important to you?
Um, I a couple of years ago kind of went through a large personal transformation, and I sort of thought more about what is it that's keeping people from finding um, not just compromise, but finding agreement, finding more
Mm,
common ground. And I found out about a phenomenon called motive attribution asymmetry. And it's a fancy word for a term for just talking about how we can easily assume that the motivations of some group we disagree with are different from ours, and is very common on both sides of the conflict for people to attribute the outgroup's motivations to fear and hatred and their own as kind of protection, resisting, love for
hmm
their own community. But if you go ask those people, they say the exact same thing. And I think that I'm very interested in not trying to create compromise solutions where people get kind of half of what they want, but I'm trying to figure out in what way can people get more of what they want in their own lives, their own communities, and yet the other people also get what they prefer, right? How do we arrange a society that people are happy with?
mm.
And the problems of America are the problems of political polarization. Not that they disagree over important things, but that the horrible gridlock that this generates. Um, and so I think that there are a lot of new and imaginative ways that we can tackle this problem.
So, would you say that political polarization is higher today than it was potentially in our parents' generation?
I'm not so sure. I think that the way that it expresses is different. I think maybe it's more visible now through in our everyday lives because of social media in a way that you would only encounter it on the TV every once in a while, right? And then it would kind of go back to its thing and you'd go have dinner. And now it's kind of in our face. So we're noticing it more. We're feeling it more. But of course, it's more like a series of ebbs and flows throughout history. And political polarization, we are experiencing this currently as angry people on the news, angry people on social media. But if you go into Spain in the 1930s, political polarization along similar cultural divides led to real violence and real
Yeah.
civil war. It's the same phenomenon. It's this motive attribution asymmetry. So it is a timeless phenomenon. We just happen to be on a certain perceived uptick from our perspective.
So, what do you think is the main driver of political polarization? Is it an economic problem? Is it a cultural problem? I know you're talking about assumptions, but why do we have such a large gulf between these in and out groups?
It's always both. And to me, there's a kind of interesting chicken and the egg problem here, which is, you know, do does um, does a kind of a broken and unhelpful system, is that what causes people to take on contradictory attitudes, or is it the other way around? Is it our belief systems that generate the broken system? I think it's both, and I can't really say which to tackle first. We have to do both. So I'm looking for a way of interacting with people, talking with people about politics that can help people find ways, new and interesting ways of looking about the world. I'm also interested in actually having answers on the systemic level, political, economic, and saying, well, here's a system that I think will let you both get what you want. What do you think? You kind of need to have both. So I've decided to tackle both of those problems.
So, in your opinion, how does someone actually go about trying to be sticking with their principles? Because I think there's a lot of people who say if you don't just stick with your principles hard in the sand, you're untrustworthy. How do you get someone to kind of have this flexibility to not be polarized? Because I think when you kind of draw a line in the sand, you're automatically making an in versus out group. While if you don't do it, you seem untrustworthy potentially.
It's true that that can. Hmm. Here's how that mistrust occurs.
Mhm.
Uh, and I've experienced this a lot myself. When you cross that line or seem to cross that line and say, I'm going to grant something to my opponent, what that does is your friends, your in group, right? They can perceive that as a betrayal. And I would say in many cases, it's that fear of being perceived that way that stops people from granting things to their opponents. And I'm not talking about granting things that that you don't believe in. I'm talking about granting them simple, like common sense things that we can just say, yes, well, okay, we both agree here. Now let's figure out where we disagree. That's the most important thing in any debate, to first decide, where do we agree? Because if we don't agree on anything, you can't have conversations. But you
Hmm.
see people get trapped into disagreeing with things that are obviously true, that on different occasions they'll tell you in private that they are believe, but then in this feud they can't grant it because they're unwilling to seem like they're betraying their friends. So they care about their friends. So you want to affirm that, and then you want to show how you can agree with some things of what your opponent says in a debate, and then still hold fast to your principles. Still say, and because we both agree here, this is why I have to reject X or Y policy. And you can do all of this while affirming the motivations of the other person you're talking with. And I find if you can pull that off, it's much better than just sticking to the us versus them side. And I try to show that. I try to model that to people when I get into disagreements on Discord or wherever. But it's not easy. But if you find that fun, it's a great way to get out of it.
So I think the last thing I really wanted to focus in on is how do you get people to focus more in on their commonalities than their differences? Because I think part of human psyche in general is we are built to focus on the negative because it inherently teaches us lessons to avoid danger. It's a part of fight or flight. The person who died from the poison berry, we're going to really hyper focus on that causes death rather than all the normal berries we've been eating necessarily. Or we're going to focus on that one bad instance compared to all the good ones. How do you think we can get people to focus more on our commonalities rather than our differences?
I think that one thing I'll say in general is that our model of human nature, whatever it is, what people are likely or unlikely to do, we need to remember that this is a model that we've generated in conditions of what I call artificial scarcity, which in simple plain language is $0 basic income, $0 of communal distribution across the whole society. And under those conditions, maybe we are quick to mistrust. Maybe we are quick to draw those lines in the sand. I don't think that that's a predominant side of us. I don't think it's something that has to be the case. And so, um, as far as what I do to try to um, cross those divisions when I encounter them, you start by affirming the motivations of the other side. Someone's ideas can be wrong. All of our ideas are wrong. I'm actually going to go on a limb and say that. Everything I think about the world is probably not exactly how the world
Mm-hmm.
works, right? Ideas are fragile, and they have to be so we can destroy them and build new ones and find better ones. But motivations, right? Like deep feelings that we have, those can't, in a sense, they cannot be called into question. They are what they are. They exist. The stories we tell about what they mean, those can change. But if you can affirm that you believe that someone is there in good faith and is trying to help, which almost everyone is, right? They're only fighting you because they think that you're not trying to help. Then you can make a lot of progress. But as for the specifics, I think there's no general rule. It depends on the subject matter. It depends on what's going on. But but yeah, so there's a lot to it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I think for this in general, I believe that a large reason why we have such a hyper focus on these social issues, which tend to be the ones that divide us more often than economics, is largely due to the fact that we come from very different cultural centers without exposure. Because I think a lot of America feels very isolated from one another. And so it's not that they have met these people and then think they're terrible people. They often are only getting clips from other people who are sharing it to them and getting that exposure to those minor moments of differences. And they're never really getting to actually talk to people. Because I will say, there are many times I've had disagreements with people, even on this show, and that I still find a lot in common more often, even despite all those differences, because we have the time to get to know one another. We get to talk and really flesh out the ideas. And so I think some of the ideas that I even appreciated from Yang's plan that I felt were criminally underrated was a lot of these like exchange programs. the people in urban America being able to go to rural America and see what that lifestyle is like, so that you can understand some of why you might care so much about guns. Well, it might be hard for you to want to give up your gun if it takes 20 to 30 minutes for the cops to arrive after you call them and you feel like you have to protect yourself. And while in urban America, it might take a lot less time and you're seeing a lot more gang violence potentially within your city. And so you say guns are a real big problem. And so I think this lack of exposure to people is also another reason why we feel like we are in and out groups. Yeah.
That's certainly true, and I find personally, yeah, exposing myself, talking to people, different ideas doesn't necessarily have to change my ideas.
Mm-hmm.
If I believe what I believe is true, then I'm not going to change it just because I like somebody or get to know them. But it does help in just getting good at that process of keeping an open mind and getting good at really good at examining disagreement in a helpful way. But I would say too that it's also inevitably the case that people are going to have different social attitudes. It's going to be inevitably the case that some people are closed-minded, and one of the problems of the current system is that it forces all of us to not tolerate that. It forces all of us to collect all of our disagreements onto a single point, which is public finance, which is what is the state doing? And to some extent, that's inevitable over questions of law. But one of the things I like about basic income is that it's going to start putting more of that public finance into the public's hands. And then instead of everything being a zero-sum question of what does the state do and how can I get this one single point to do what I want, you're going to be getting more and more power, authority to help determine what you want your own political economy to be a little bit more like. And so that I think will go a long way towards resolving these disputes that people get into.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point I hadn't considered, but I think that might also be one of the biggest reasons why, as we saw in Yang's movement, it was one of the more unifying campaigns in the cycle, being able to get people who are Trump voters and conservatives and libertarians, independents, and even people like myself who were former Bernie Sanders supporters who, at the time, I was a democratic socialist up until the point I joined Yang. So when you have this, instead of power being concentrated into the one point of the government, where even that conservative faction and that democratic socialist faction might have to keep fighting each other at that point, but you're simply redistributing it to all of them to make the decisions for themselves, I do think that that creates a lot less conflict, because now instead of you both having to choose how $2,000 is used between you two, you both get $1,000 to choose for yourself. I think that
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of difference for people at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the socialists haven't put their thinking caps on about this, because if you put 20 socialists in a room and they have UBI, you can fund a co-op by fiat
Yeah.
on the spot. And if you get 2,000 socialists or a million of them connecting online, well, the sky's the limit. We're talking about alternative modes of production existing alongside what they call capitalism. So this is going to change. This is going to change our whole attitude about politics, about the economy, and I'm looking forward to them, you know, gears turning and them realizing that. It's going to be very
I
interesting.
would love to see that, a little bit of innovation within the socialist movement, not trying to necessarily have it be at a national level, but if you want to be someone in that community, make your own community too. There's nothing in our laws preventing you from starting your own community and funding whatever initiatives you want. You have that local power if you so desire. Um,
That's true. Yeah, you can have an anarchist commune if you want. Just fund it, and then as long as you don't bother other people, you're good. You can set your own rules for the modes of production.
Yeah, exactly. I'm honestly surprised we don't have more. Like, I visited Israel at one point during Birthright and got to see what a kibbutz was like, which is essentially exactly this, kind of like a commune. And the communities are really well built, but it's not necessarily interfering with the overall system of what Israel does.
Right. Yes. And the reason why we don't have this today, I think, is we lack social capital.
Mm,
We there's a certain, just kind of like when you're building a fire, there's a certain amount you need to start to get going here.
yep.
But we're all very heavily pressured to act as economic individuals in the current landscape. But when you give people basic income, you dramatically increase the available social capital they have, and that's going to transform society as we know it.
Yeah, I think the last topic I wanted to ask you on is largely, I think this topic of political polarization has been increasing more, as you said from the beginning, because we're becoming more aware of it due to social media. What do you think is something that can be done in terms of social media to help reduce political polarization or just polarization in general?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Um, I think that I'm more optimistic about social media than I used to be. Before I went on Twitter, I had this negative association that it was just all screaming. Turns out there's a lot of screaming, but there's also some really insightful and interesting and compassionate discussions going on there. I would say if you care about this and you're on these platforms, you don't have to retreat necessarily from all of these platforms, but I would just say try to engage with compassion forward. Try to um, try to see if you can lead by example. And when you disagree, see if you can disagree in a neutral way where you're not passing judgment on people. You're discussing ideas. And you can take someone's idea and you can tell them what would be the case if it was true and what would be the case if it wasn't true. And it's hard to do, and it doesn't it's not you're not beholden to do this, right? I would say the most important thing is to look after your own mental health. And if
Yeah.
you're reading a lot of stuff that's making you angry and anxious, that's a sign for you to take a break and focus on other things in life. So, to a certain extent, under the current environment, I think social media is going to be kind of all of our anxieties are going to come out there. It's not until we have a more social society that social media is going to start looking nicer, and I think it will start to look nicer. So just hang in there. We're going to get through it.
Yeah, I do agree with you. That would have a large impact. I do find that I even get suckered into the trap sometimes of increasing the polarization myself. I think a
Yeah,
large lesson that I've had myself is that largely, it's not 100% of the time, but largely you reap what you sow. If you are putting out good energy into the world, a lot of times good energy is going to come back to you in return. And so try your best, I think, to kind of take a step back sometimes and try to not be so ego defensive. I think that's a large thing of what social media does is it's not us. It's this virtual perception of us that we've established for others and we're trying to protect that, and so we
yeah,
fight other people to try and protect that image. And I think a lot of the time we have to just take a step back and say we're not getting every decision we make right. We're not perfect, but we can keep trying and push things in a more positive direction and a more issue-based direction so that we can say, okay, we can respectfully disagree on the solution, but I see that your motivation is to solve a very similar problem to mine. And so we're really on the same team, even if we are disagreeing on some of the details. And
absolutely. I agree.
yeah, and with that being said, I wanted to thank you so much, Derek, for being able to come on today. I really think this was a very necessary topic to be able to discuss this week. I think as we've been seeing, political polarization and the scarcity mindset in general has really been ratcheting up as the primaries have been going on in our country right now. And so I really appreciate you coming on to be able to discuss this with me today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I had a great time. Happy to talk anytime you like.
With that being said, is there anything that you wanted to share with the Rosebuds that you have going on that they should go check out?
I mean, the first thing I would say is my stuff. Check out Alex Howlett. If you're interested in the economics of basic income, he has a website, gresham.org, Greshm. And I think it's the most fascinating and interesting take on basic income that I've heard. And it informs a lot of my thinking. And if you disagree, at the very least, it's something interesting to talk about. So check that out for sure. If you'd like to know more about what I'm up to, I'm going to be posting stuff on my website, derekvangorder.com. And yeah, and I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Derek Van Gorder. So that's me.
Okay, well, that's great. I hope everyone checks out Derek's work first for coming on today and being able to share his thoughts. And you should also go check out Alex Hallett, a little preview before we have him on ourselves. I think that would be a really great journey for us to go on. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about his CMT model myself. With that being said, my Rosebuds, I would want you to always check out the description section below so that you can find all those details included, as well as the cheat sheet and the sign-up sheet so that you can come on just like Derek did today to be able to talk to me on your top political priorities. Let me know what you thought about today's episode by commenting down below. Please do all that YouTube and podcast stuff, liking and subscribing so that you can show that you appreciated this video and you're aware when new ones come out. And until next time, I hope you have a great week, and to the Rosebuds out there, I hope you stay rosy.